American Movie Classics presents an original production.
This is hallowed ground to movie buffs. In 1957, Alfred Hitchcock came to the Golden Gate Bridge to create one of the most extraordinary and memorable images in motion picture history. This is the place where Jimmy Stewart jumped into San Francisco Bay to save Kim Novak in Vertigo.
When Vertigo was first released, it wasn't one of Hitchcock's greatest hits, but time does things to movies in the way we see them. Today, many people regard Vertigo as Hitchcock's masterpiece, but along the way, it was almost lost to us forever.
The first time I can remember seeing Vertigo was at its first release here in New York, and I saw it in its original VistaVision projection with Hitchcock's extraordinary use of color. Over the years, I kept being drawn and drawn to the picture, like being drawn into a whirlpool of obsession. A very, very beautiful, comfortable, almost nightmarish obsession. And I think, for me, I found it fascinating years later when I look back and realized that towards the end of the studio system, such a highly personal movie could come out of that studio system with major stars.
In 1951, Alfred Hitchcock came to San Francisco for the opening of Strangers on a Train. The master of suspense always liked to show the audience a familiar setting and then introduce an unexpected twist of malice. As he studied the visual splendor of the Golden Gate Bridge, Hitchcock was heard to remark that San Francisco would be a good location for a murder mystery.
He loved San Francisco. He felt it was a very glamorous city. He felt it was rather like an American Paris. That's how he described it. He felt it was very cosmopolitan, more so than any of the cities he had seen at that time.
It would take 6 years before the romantic and mysterious images forming in Hitchcock's imagination would find their way to the screen. Working for Paramount in the 1950s, he made a string of remarkable movies, beginning with Rear Window and culminating with Vertigo. Universal Studios was Hitchcock's creative home for the final decades of his career. Here, Vertigo would be rescued from the ravages of time by Robert Harris and James Katz.
We chose Vertigo as a candidate for restoration for two reasons. Number one, it's a great film. It's one of the most important films ever made. Number two, the film elements themselves, both picture and sound, were in dire need of preservation.
Vertigo is also a film that audiences have not seen on the big screen for years, in fact 12 years. It was last released theatrically in 1984, and the elements were poor to say the least. You don't just start a restoration, you have to do a lot of research. We bring in elements from all over the world to one place where we can look at them and assess the quality of the picture and the sound and decide at a certain point, can we do this at all? There are many films that are not possible to restore.
When we first opened the cans on Vertigo, basically what we found was a faded negative. Virtually looked in many scenes as though the negative had been dragged on the floor before it had been printed. And we had differential shrinkage between the yellow, cyan, and magenta separation masters, which really led us to restore the film in a totally different manner. Once a picture either has gotten to a point where it has not been preserved properly or it hasn't been preserved at all, then you need restoration. To preserve a film is a phone call, a purchase order, a lab order. To restore a film is a year to 2 years of work and major commitment.
Universal would commit more than $1 million to the restoration of Vertigo. Alfred Hitchcock believed in what he called pure cinema, pictures without words. Once he had a setting in mind, his next step was to find a story. The French novel D'Entre les Morts, From Among the Dead, would provide the foundation for Vertigo. Hitchcock dispatched his longtime associate producer, Herbert Coleman, to begin preparations in Northern California and to find a Spanish mission for the picture's climactic scenes. The landscape of California's pioneer past would stand in eerie visual counterpoint to the scenes of modern San Francisco.
It was 1955, 41 years ago, when I first walked onto this plaza and knew instantly that Mission Old San Juan Bautista would be the location Hitchcock wanted to use in our picture Vertigo.
In this haunting, romantic thriller, Detective Scotty Ferguson falls in love with a woman mysteriously drawn to places from the past, a trail leading to a mission bell tower. The original bell tower of San Juan Bautista was destroyed in a fire long ago. So Hitchcock and his artist would conjure up a new one out of paint and plaster. The script had to be perfect before Hitchcock would begin production. With his wife Alma, he would spend months on story construction before hiring a screenwriter. Playwright Maxwell Anderson was the first writer engaged by Hitchcock and Herbert Coleman.
And he turned in a screenplay called Listen, Darkling, and that will tell you the whole story. It was, no one could figure out what it meant, and the screenplay was exactly the same. So then we found another writer, Alec Koppel, who did a great improvement to Listen Darkling, but still not satisfactory. So then we started a search and found Sam Taylor.
Author of the play Sabrina Fair, filmed twice as Sabrina, Samuel Taylor would spend a year working with Hitchcock on the Vertigo screenplay.
In those first talks, we decided that the more emotion there was in the man, the stronger the picture would be. And he found, without even thinking about it, that he was making a picture that went much deeper than most of his pictures, just because the basic story, not the plot, but the basic story, had a true human emotion. This obsession of a man who, for the first time in his life, had fallen deeply in love.
Hitchcock's frequent leading man, James Stewart, was perfect casting as the detective with a fear of heights. Hitchcock was enthralled with the young actress Vera Miles. He planned to use Vertigo to build her into a major star. In early 1957, she posed for these hair and costume tests as Madeline. Vera Miles also modeled for this early version of the painting that features prominently in the story, the portrait of Carlotta.
Then is when we started encountering delay after delay, starting with Hitch's problems with his gallbladder, and an operation was necessary. And then when Hitch recovered and we were all set to go, Vera Miles announced that she was pregnant and couldn't do the film.
Hitchcock was deeply disappointed, but he couldn't let go of his image of the cool, mysterious Madeline. He finally chose Kim Novak as the incarnation of romantic fantasy in Vertigo. As the 2-year restoration progresses, Harris and Katz draw on state-of-the-art technical facilities at Universal and at laboratories throughout Hollywood. Restoring more than 1,000 pieces of film negative and using original Technicolor prints for reference, they experiment with modern film stocks and processing techniques to recreate the precise visual texture Hitchcock intended for every shot.
Vertigo was photographed in a Paramount process called VistaVision, which was an extremely high-quality process, which was normally reduction printed to 35 millimeter.
VistaVision went through the camera from right to left. It was horizontal, and it was a double-frame 35 millimeter image.
Rather than reduction printing it, we're basically taking it across 1-to-1 and converting it to 70 millimeter. For the first time, people can now see Vertigo the way that it was intended to be seen in large format.
Vertigo began principal photography in San Francisco in September 1957. During the 16 days of location shooting, Hitchcock's 45th feature was still titled From Among the Dead. Director and star had the support of Hitchcock's devoted staff, who emulated his British formality and quiet professionalism. Cinematographer Robert Burks carried out Hitchcock's color scheme of reds and greens and used fog filters to create a dreamlike atmosphere. The screenplay was followed religiously. Script supervisor Peggy Robertson made sure the shooting proceeded according to Hitchcock's meticulous preparations.
Every picture that I worked with him on was always storyboarded, and that would be one of the first requisites of his work. Hitch was the only director I've ever known who never looked through a camera. He didn't even stand close to the camera. He would say, "You got 3 inch on then you cut there." He'd tell them where they cut, and he'd always be right. He just transformed himself into the camera eye.
Madeline. Jimmy Stewart as Scotty created one of his most brilliant and complex character portraits.
Madeline, tell me.
No.
Madeline, tell me what it is. Where do you go?
No, I
what
can't
takes you
tell
away?
you.
When you jumped into the bay, you didn't know where you were. You guessed, but you didn't know.
I didn't jump. I fell. You
Why
told
did
me
you
I
jump?
fell.
Why did you jump?
I think Jimmy personified for my father every man, so that when people went to see a picture, they could put themselves in Jimmy's place. And especially in Vertigo, he wanted the audiences to identify with Jimmy, which is what everybody did.
Hitchcock molded Kim Novak into the strange, aloof Madeline and into Judy, her earthier reincarnation. In perhaps the finest performance of her career, Novak brought a startling emotional intensity to her dual role.
It excites me to work on dual personalities because I think I have many myself. And I think that I was able to use so much of me in that movie. And working with Alfred Hitchcock, I adored working with him because, well, at first I was feeling insecure because I kept saying, well, now, is this right? How do you want me to play this character? And he said, I hired you, and that's why I want what you bring to this role. But what I do expect from you is to stand where I want you to, wear what I want you to, and speak in the rhythm that I want you to. And he worked a long time with me to try to get the right rhythm.
We were forbidden to play here. Sister Teresa would scold us.
Look at this. Here's your gray horse.
Madeline had the complication and the excitement and energy underneath. It was all very, very held back on the outside, but underneath there were so many things going that I think that's part of what fascinated Jimmy Stewart, caused him a compulsion to want her, to possess her.
Well, what is it?
Could I ask you a couple of questions?
What for? Who are you?
My name's John Ferguson.
When he opens the door, do you know, and that feeling of wanting to go to him, of wanting to run away from him, wanting to, you know, all of these mixed conflicts all at one time. It was really, really powerful.
What's this doohickey?
It's a brassiere. You know about those things. You're a big boy now.
Scotty's friend Midge was played with great sympathy by the highly acclaimed stage and screen actress Barbara Bel Geddes.
Hitchcock was a wonderful director. I remember he came up to me, I think that first day, and it made me laugh so, because he said, "Now, Barbara, don't act. And that's all he said to me, you see. I remember a scene at the drawing board where Midge was talking and drawing at the same time, and he'd say, "Barbara, look up," and I'd look up.
Aren't you ever going to get married?
You know there's only one man in the world for me, Johnny-O.
You mean me? We were engaged once, though, weren't we?
And he'd say, "Now look down," and I'd look down. And he'd say, "Now look left," and I'd look left. Anyway, he said, "That was what? Cut! Very good," you see. So that was that.
The most celebrated of Hollywood's costume designers, Edith Head, shared Hitchcock's fondness for the use of color to heighten emotion.
Edith loved working with Hitch, and Vertigo was a real challenge because he had very, very definite ideas about what he wanted Kim to wear, especially this gray suit. Now, Kim did not want to wear gray, but Hitch was absolutely definite about that. She had to wear gray. Gray is not really a blonde's color, and there was something off-putting about it, but that was the psychology of the whole thing. Edith and Hitch wanted this to be a very, very dramatic gown when she's seen at Ernie's, and it is absolutely sensational. When Kim makes her entrance, every eye is upon her because she's absolutely breathtaking. And then when she went to Jimmy Stewart's apartment, she wore this magnificent white coat. Hitch was very definite about the kind of costumes that he wanted and the colors. And of course, white on a blonde is perfect. And it has a black chiffon scarf that goes through here and drapes down the back. And even that had a sense of mystery about it because the wind would catch this and mysteriously whip around her. You know, it all had a very eerie effect to it. But that was Hitch's genius.
There's someone within me, and she says I must die. Oh, Scotty, don't let me go.
I'm here.
The production moved back to Hollywood for 2 months of shooting at Paramount Studios. The art director was Henry Bumstead. This was one of 4 films he designed for Hitchcock.
Everything is a set. Hitch liked working in the comfort of the stage, and he didn't like to shoot in real locations, on interiors. He'd get the exterior, I think he was a master of that, get all the meat on the exterior, and then you would build the set on the stage where he could control the lighting and his actors.
Bumstead designed more than 50 individual sets for Vertigo, including the interior of the Mission Bell Tower. Hitchcock himself was once a set designer. His original pencil sketch for the San Francisco Club was first transformed into a painting and then into Bumstead's richly textured set. Hitchcock drew these steps for Jimmy Stewart's dive into San Francisco Bay. The central metaphor of Vertigo was graphically rendered in Henry Bumstead's expressionistic set for the Bell Tower. 70 feet high, the set gave Hitchcock's stars a real feeling of vertigo. The much-imitated vertigo effect was achieved by a combination of zooming forward and tracking backward simultaneously. After much trial and error, filming on a full-size set proved impossible, so they used a large-scale model of a staircase. Turned on its side, It was filmed by special effects cameraman John Fulton to make the audience feel as dizzy as Jimmy Stewart. Legendary composer Bernard Herrmann contributed immensely to Vertigo's emotional impact. His hypnotic, intensely romantic score is one of the most memorable in movie history. Hitchcock's favorite composer was the instrument of the director's innermost feelings. Saul Bass revolutionized the art of title design in the 1950s by using a single graphic image to capture a movie's mystique. Hitchcock's recurring spiral motif was abstracted by Bass to evoke the psychological vortex of Vertigo. His main title sequence and poster have made that image an indelible part of our movie landscape. The last step in the 2-year restoration process is putting picture together with sound. In the Hitchcock Theatre at Universal, Robert Harris and James Katz supervised the meticulous reconstruction of Vertigo's soundtrack in 6-channel DTS stereo.
Because it was a Paramount picture, one of the first places that we stopped to search for materials were the Paramount vaults, and they opened them up to us. I mean, they were really wonderful. And what we found were the original music recordings. Preservation was done at Universal, and fortunately we were able to get about 90% of the sound off them.
No, we're together.
What was this,
Because the original stereo music tracks are being used in the film for the first time, some of the sound effects had to be replaced. Many sounds were recreated by using the Foley recording technique.
I just thought that if I gave you a drink...
When you're dealing with a picture like Vertigo, there's a tremendous following, Hitchcock following, Vertigo following. So we can't improvise on the Foley. We can't improvise on the effects. We have to get them exactly right.
One really nice thing was that Hitchcock's original dubbing notes had survived, and we were able to obtain them. And this really gave us guidance as to how precisely to orient the Foley and the effects and the dialogue and the music. Hitchcock's feeling always was that less is more. And we wanted to keep it in the spirit of the way that Hitchcock wanted the film to sound in 1958, but using modern technology.
The problem with it being, too, is we won't be able to get that spread on the music.
Yeah, I didn't mind. I thought the Foley was good.
I think it is.
Sometimes... Okay. When you talk about restoration, you're talking about picture and you're talking about sound. I mean, these, we may be working on a picture for months and then working on the sound for months, and we never see them together. That's one of the really exciting things that happens when we finally are able to put the sound and picture together and see what it's really going to look like.
Triumphantly restored, Hitchcock's masterpiece returns to the screen. With breathtaking clarity of picture and sound, Vertigo has been given new life. its magnificent images no longer worn and faded. Thanks to this painstaking labor of love, the haunting vision of a master filmmaker will astonish and obsess movie audiences for generations to come.
Universal, in their own quiet way, is probably the studio that's in the forefront today of film preservation. When Vertigo is finally completed, we leave a new 65mm preservation negative. We leave a 65mm duplicating positive. We're leaving enough films so that we can get Vertigo, hopefully through at least the next 200 years.
Now what we're doing is releasing an enhanced version of the film and maintaining, I think, the spirit of the picture. And audiences who have seen Vertigo before will be thrilled with, we think, and accept. And yet we're putting up something that Alfred Hitchcock never saw and was never able to see when he made the film in 1958.
I know I'm a little bit jealous of people who are going to be seeing the film for the first time, because I'd love to know what that's like and to see it in 70mm and DTS. It should really be an incredible experience.
I think Alfred Hitchcock adored this movie. I think he was obsessed with this movie. I don't know, perhaps he was with many of his others as well, because that's the kind of director he was. But Hitch loved this movie more than any. I do believe so.
I think he was pleased, and I know I was pleased, that over a period of time, the reputation of the picture grew, and that scholars and critics began to talk of it as one of his most important pictures, and finally people were saying it is really his most important picture. I know he was pleased about that.
I think people today love his movies even more than when they were brought out, and that is because he made the movie for the audience. I think there are still things in the movie that I don't understand, and I think probably other people don't, but I think that's good. I think that makes it fun, and I think it's great to go back and see it again and say, oh, now I understand what that was supposed to mean.
Vertigo somehow stands out, and I think it stands out because it was unabashedly personal. And I think that's where the truth lies in the picture, and that's why I think it sustains over the years. And you don't know exactly, well, the person who made this feels this way or whatever. You can't put it into words, but there's something that's genuine about it, and that is just not dealing with the schematics of plot or whatever. That has a very strong heart behind it, and a very, very troubling look at humanity in a way. But it's something that's honest and true, and that has a great deal of psychological complexity, and that's lasted over the years.